Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Poketown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be looking at the Dortmund Regional Championship results. It is the first tournament with the Paldean Fates cards legal, and it was a 1,348 player event. Pretty big for Europe. We're kind of getting used to these numbers still. It still feels like an IC number to me for European events, certainly. And some really interesting stuff in our top 8 and a few other stories among the top performing decks as well. Let's start off with the day 1 and 2 fields though, and we have Charizard being the most popular deck, and as expected it's actually dropped off from that 17% just down to 16. Still pretty much the most popular deck in the room, but it feels like things like Gutina are coming to meet it as two decks vying for the sort of top dog right now, as Gutina continues to be a little bit less popular because it is a more difficult deck to pilot. That's the consideration at the very least, and it's gaining that 14% is pretty much the highest we've seen for a number of tournaments now, and they are going to continue to vie for contention. I wouldn't expect too much change for the percentages of either of these decks. There aren't many more tournaments in Paldean Fates. There is Utrecht, but there's also the Vancouver Regional Championships for our US players as well, so there are going to be some reactions to the small tweaks from Paldean Fates here and there, but I wouldn't be surprised if these percentages stayed pretty similar actually. Roaring Moon continuing to be that more popular deck, shining higher and brighter than Miraidon right now, where you are basically choosing to have a better Mew matchup. I feel like you also have a slightly better Charizard matchup compared to Miraidon, whereas Miraidon boasts like the better time into Lost Zone box and Gardevoir, I would hedge. It depends on which Lost Zone box it is. If it's like Sablezard or if it's playing Mini or Glasses, perhaps not. But other builds, Miraidon will be kind of superior into. Kind of an interesting back and forth between these two aggressive decks. I feel matchup percentage-wise it does make sense for Roaring Moon to be the more popular of the two right now, where Miraidon is kind of split between playing some Judge Path shenanigans and some playing Peony Casino style builds. I was actually very close to pulling the trigger on playing actually a Peony Miraidon. I actually got cold feet on the deck because I've never played coin flip catchers in a real tournament before, and I kind of wanted to keep it that way, which is just a random thing. But yeah, Gardevoir and Lost Zone box remain quite popular archetypes, and as we get to the best of the rest, we have Mew kind of hiding back a little bit. We've seen it more popular in previous tournaments. It does seem like the amount of Roaring Moon in addition to Charizard, plus the fact that a lot of Tinas were likely to play Spiritomb because it's helping you catch Mew, Snorlax, and Roaring Moon to an extent. It kind of makes sense that Mew is going to be that less popular play, because if you're not great into Zard, a number of the Tinas and Roaring Moon, you know, those are the three most popular decks, right? So it's certainly a risky and difficult time to be playing Mew right now. Chien-Pao at 4%, Goldengo at 3%, both kind of these PokeStop item-heavy base builds, both utilizing Greninja, oftentimes Cologne, even in the Goldengo builds, sometimes Iron Hands in the POW builds as well. Snorlax never that popular, and again is a little bit threatened by the amount of Tina and Lost Zone box out there right now. Even things like Roaring Moon are these aggressive archetypes with a couple switch outs. They can be tricky at times, especially because you can gouge yourself as Roaring Moon and then Iono them to low hand sizes and buy yourself 3 turns of just smacking back into them. So Snorlax does have a number of awkward matchups in the field as well. Iron Valiant, not super popular day 1, but it did have a pretty good tournament overall, and then Inteleon VMAX did claim that 1%, where again its matchup seems to have dipped a little bit with the amount of Roaring Moon in the mix now. The day 2 data was absolutely wild for Dortmund. Roaring Moon had a roaring success, and Charizard had a real failure, going all the way from 16% all the way down to 10%. That means it was leapfrogged by Lost Zone box, which also had a really good tournament, Gardevoir, which had a very strong showing, and Tina, which kind of held its placement as well. Mew also having a better time than the likes of Miraidon in the mix, so also making it onto that day 2 graphic, which is a pretty interesting thing to see. So yeah, Charizard, it feels like the format may be a little bit too volatile for it, perhaps with Roaring Moon in the mix. I know a number of these Lost boxes were playing things like Tropius Glasses, which catches Roaring Moon and Charizard all in one go, and we can't really get away from the fact that Roaring Moon seemed to have been profiting really nicely from that day 1 to day 2, so possibly some catcher builds of Roaring Moon have a better time into Charizard than more standard builds, I would say. And then we get to the day 2 kind of best of the rest. There was 8 unclassified archetypes. Miraidon had 4%, Arceus made it into the graphic, then we have Chien-Pao, Intel, and Iron Valiant all sort of retaining their very low play, but still having having some conversion at the very least. Getting into the top 8 then, we have Owen Kammerman winning with Chow. They've actually previously got a regional top 4 with the archetype, playing a classic Grant Shen build, and really there's just a few acute changes here where there's been a cut of mana fee, which is risky, we saw that in the finals, but it can buy you a space, and simply playing an extra nest ball by the looks of things, just from the jump is all we've gone for here. Just more cards that get you into the game, which is always reasonable. If you're making that hedge that a number of these Tinas will only play 2 water energy, sometimes it never comes off, and just in general against these other matchups, there isn't enough Greninja to really be that worried, I suppose. There will be some lost boxes that have that option, but generally the idea being that you can evolve into Baxcalibur by the time that's going to be relevant is pretty okay for you. Chow in the early kind of weeks of this meta did get bullied by a number of Gardevoirs that played Avery Screamtail that was really, really good against Chow. Now that's kind of fallen by the wayside, and Gardevoir basically just plays Research now alongside Ionas and whatnot, and actually makes the Chow matchup once again favoured into Gardevoir. And we saw that was actually kind of big in our day 2 field, as well as Iron Hands just being good into the Lost Zone box matchups for the most part, and against Tina as well. Both the Greninja plus the Iron Hands being options here. Interestingly enough, seeing no cancelling clone, but that's not necessarily mandatory as it's not a consistency card, and there's so many Tinas that don't play Manaphy anyway. It looks like that you kind of get away with that. So yeah, a really consistent shell. Not a single space dedicated to fluff, just trying to have the staple cards. Interesting to see no of the new Frigibacks. If you are playing a 70 hit pointer, I do think the collect one is the correct one. But yeah, looks like a really, really solid build from someone who's played Chow to a high placement before. Seems like a good combination for success and a good week to play the deck as well. Next up we have Yella playing Goldengo, so I'm sure picked up a few fans along the way. We have seen some top 32 placements and whatnot, but to see a Goldengo make it all the way to the finals is pretty exciting. Some cool introductions here where we have a split of Worker and Avery. Most people go heavy on that Worker side and just respect Path to the maximum, but having Avery can be a huge headache for some setup decks like Charizard and Gardevoir and whatnot, whilst also being a pain for a number of Lost Box builds. So yeah, adding in that pressure. I know Azul had been talking about Avery and Goldengo for a couple of weeks, and seeing the combination of Avery plus having the threat of Cross Switcher and Cologne still, if your opponent keeps their Manaphy on board, is really, really dangerous, which is kind of cool. Spiritomb is becoming more and more staple in the Goldengo deck, and it gives you a bit of extra help against Roaring Moon, so why not? Yeah, seems like a pretty solid list. Again, similar to the Chow build, having that huge ratio of items still at your disposal, so you are making the most out of this Stadium card just to really do the thing. Fellow CCG teammate Benji Fan made it to top 4 with Giratina. They're pretty experienced with Giratina. I've played it for a number of kind of big tournaments with really great success. There's nothing too crazy about the deck list. It is playing the Tomb Avery, which I was a big fan of, and is also cutting one of the switch cards to have Escape Rope as an extra kind of option that isn't necessarily expected in Tinas these days, which I think is a cool kind of surprise factor card to have in the list, which every now and then can come up. So Owen Kammerman won the event, and even though it wasn't Brennan Kammerman, Stian actually played Brennan's 60 from a previous week in Liverpool, that top 4 list. So once again, the same list made top 4, and it feels like the Roaring Moon Radzard is kind of continue to be under-respected. I see so many people say that, ooh, yucky, I don't want to play Gates in a Lost Box build that doesn't play Radiant Greninja because it's kind of clunky and whatnot, but it seems to just be a really good combination. You hit those gates, you get an early Charizard, or you have Roaring Moon to gouge through stuff. It seems to just be the right mix of cards. I even see this a lot in Japan. Even in post-rotation, I'm seeing this list in Japan where it is Charizard plus Moon plus Gates. So it's done so much of this format with a couple of pilots now. It's not just a testament to how good of a player. It's not just a testament to Brennan now, it's also just a testament to the list itself. So it feels like a really well-worked 60, and it has the answers with this small pool of attackers to get the job done in a ton of situations. So again, a huge shout out to the build from Brennan, but Stian having a great showing with it just really proves this is a great way to play Sablezard right now. We also had a Mew in top 4 at Europe after all, and Arnie was able to have this finish with a fusion-based build. Does have the attackers in here, not just having these sparkles kind of for show and to help out against the Spiritombs or whatnot. It is trying to be that aggressive archetype. Has a couple Lost Cities, does have one Path, one Judge, so this is kind of the lowest end of Path you see. Definitely a more sort of attacking-centric build of Mew, and this build definitely seems to make a lot of sense if we are expecting Roaring Moon to continue. Having a 1 prize you can throw into the mix to force that extra attack out of these Roaring Moon players is a really big deal. And then we had 3 Gardevoirs rounding out the top 8. They did all lose in top 8, but it seemed to have a really, really good showing. We start with Gabe Smart, who is a pretty experienced Gardevoir player. Actually, all 3 in top 8 are experienced Gardevoir players. And we see the first Paldean Fates card. Yes, it is a new format. Moonlit Hill did make it into Gabe's list. I tested this. I actually played Gardevoir for the tournament and didn't play Moonlit Hill. I don't think it's all that valuable, honestly, but it can give you extra ways to push your Brainwave, which is okay, I guess, and it does help out against Iron Valiant builds and Rapid strike builds. I don't think those archetypes are popular enough, and the day one field kind of shows that that data's correct. But it can just be this clutch card to again push your attack, which is kind of okay. It does let you do some more setup stuff. I feel like this isn't ever as valuable as Lost Vacuum, because I still think that Mew is a bigger threat, and random like Arceus stuff with Box of Disaster are bigger threats. So that's why I kind of like the Vacuum a little bit more. But Moonlit Hill has shown up in a list. You know, it had been doing really, really well in Japan over and over again, so it's no surprise to see it show up here and there. Gabe playing mostly VIP list, just with 3 copies in here, but does flip-flop a Fog for a VIP, which is kind of interesting. I do think Fog carries throughout the entire game and is kind of the more live card, but it does reduce your odds of your like Mew hitting in the opening stages, so it kind of reduces the impact of this combination, I suppose, and it's playing a pretty straightforward support account. This is the exact support account I actually played at the tournament, so landing on some pretty similar conclusions to myself here. James Cox has also been on Gardevoir for a while. You can check them out streaming all the time, playing this deck, playing for many, many hours, and James hates research and is choosing to play Double Avery. With the amount of Gardevoir that wasn't only in day 1, but also converting into day 2, it seems like Double Avery was a pretty good choice, because it does give you a pretty favoured mirror to have Cress and Screamtail and Double Avery. That's a really heavy target for the mirror match situations, which is pretty cool. The Cress over Jirachi is a little bit of a risk against the Tinas, but it seems like James was able to navigate it quite nicely. Has the usual sort of stadium bounce split that you like to see. Is playing one more like supporter slot over Level, which always makes me a little bit sad, because Level is such a clutch card. But yeah, James is really experienced with Gardevoir, so no surprise to see them at the top tables with the archetype. And then finally we have Rowan, who's also made the trip over to play Gardevoir and has already had some great placements with the archetype again, so is once again super experienced. Is playing a no VIP list and instead is going maximum Ultra Ball plus Fish, and also has Palpad in the 60, giving you some reload for some of these one-off supporters, and even just reloading like Research and Iono and Mirror and all these other situations is pretty powerful. So pretty cool to see, and Rowan once again backing the choice to play Jirachi Crest to double down on the Tina matchup, and saying that Screamtail is not that mandatory in the matchups where it's good. You have other lines of play regardless, and Rowan kind of showing the way with that one, that this is just a great solid combo into the Lost Zone builds. For the other talking points, Matias was able to get 9th place with Entei Valiant, but not just any Entei Valiant build, it's the same list as Tyler Matthews from a couple weeks ago in Knoxville, so crazy to see that the same list, even though this is really like tailored and specific, you know, with the random Serena includes and stuff like that, the list again was just rocked and had a really, really great showing, so Entei Valiant may deserve some uptick in play rate. Roaring Moon, despite that huge conversion from day 1 to day 2, its highest placement was 10th, and it wasn't on the bubble either, so a pretty decent showing for a number of these Roaring Moons. It's not the same list as the usual Cawthorn build, because it is playing the quad Pokemon catcher. And like I said, I think this is a contributing factor into the Charizard matchup, where you can just take out certainly Pidgeot, but also early V Pokemon like Luminion or Rotom, which force their onto the board in a number of situations for you to retain that sort of 2-2-2 prize map. Miraidon didn't have the best tournament overall, but did manage a top 16 placement. Pretty interesting list here as well, where it is playing the defensive stadiums of Path, has Arven in here to help with a couple of these tool cards, the EXP share still in the deck list, and TM Devolution being a one-of in the list as well. Not the all-out aggro builds that we're used to seeing, but having an element of Iono Path can give you win condition into so many matchups right now. You know, it's really good into Charizard, Roaring Moon, and a number of other archetypes kind of crumble after that turn 1 path if you've gone first, so certainly is a solid choice. We do have a couple Pidgeot Snorlaxes in and around the top tables as well. Magnus once again playing that Paradox Lost Box, which is always such a cool thing to see. And then right towards the bottom of the top 32, we have Rasmus, who gets the coolest deck award in top 32, because they've brought the Lost Zone Dialga V-Star. We have the Leafy Camo Poncho to try and protect your boy whilst you accumulate Mirage Gates to ramp towards that Star Chronos, which is really cool. You do have a number of these single prize attacking options. You have Water Energy for Greninja to attack. You have the Psychic for Sableye. You have Retaliate from Zamazenta, which is a solid card as well. Seeing Path Iono in the deck list as well is such an interesting way to play this deck, and certainly a different way, because you don't really just stumble upon these cards. They don't look like they synergize with the deck inherently, so there seems to have been some great testing going on here, so a really cool innovation from them. And then finally, Matias once again bringing the Bennett Gardevoir. I've actually played against this myself in a tournament back in Lille, so pretty cool to see it come back. There are some slight differences, no longer playing the sort of Arven package, and has changed up the support account a little bit. Dreepy's a new inclusion that I definitely didn't see when I played against them the first time. Playing Trekking Shoes in here as well, so some cool innovations going on within the 60, but having this item lock package, and then knowing when to turn on the aggression with attacking with Gardevoir EX once you've Painful Spoon certain targets across the board and whatnot is pretty cool. Having the Poltergeist sort of smacking option when required as well. Yeah, very cool archetype. And we know that Matias loves playing item lock and is very adept at it, so no surprise to see, again, a really good placement for them. That wraps up Dortmund then. We do have the special event in Utrecht coming at the start of March, so we have a couple of weeks to react to this tournament, and how do we do that with Chempao and Goldengo making the finals? Pretty crazy. We finally have a Brazilian regional on the horizon as well, which is really awesome for them, and we have Vancouver, which will be the last tournament of the Paldean Fates meta before we have rotation, and before we have the introduction of Temporal Forces. We're really going to start ramping up the content on Temporal Forces coming soon. Towards the end of the month, we'll have the set review. Keep an eye out for the community set review. That's going to be coming very shortly for you guys, because it really helps us out. And myself and Jack have started to proxy things up. I've got stuff built, and we're going to try some tabletop gameplay as well. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Let me know your thoughts down below, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one. Cheers.